Joining us to talk about that, as well as the revelations about who tipped off the FBI to the George Papadopoulos conversation and got this whole ball of wax started in the first place. We're pleased to be joined by Ed Morrissey. He is senior editor for hotair.com and columnist for The Week. Ed, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Again.
So why don't we start with Sam Nunberg and your impressions of his tour de force on the cable TV news shows yesterday.
Well, I'm not sure what the point of that was. At the very end of the day, he winds up giving he starts off by going on every major news network and declaring that he's not going to cooperate with this grand jury subpoena, that he wants to go on live television to tear it up. He accuses Donald Trump of having something to hide, then says Donald Trump did nothing wrong. He says Carter Page was colluding with Russians, and then says later on that he's never talked to Carter Page. I mean, it was this crazy series of interviews, and then at the end of it all, he gives an interview to the Associated Press in which he says, "Oh, well, I'm probably going to cooperate with the subpoena after all." I mean, it was.
Yeah, and
I'm not sure, other than destroying his own credibility, I'm not sure what the point of that was.
That was a partnership tryout for Roger Stone.
Yeah, I mean, that was the one constant, right?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, but he did say at the end he would cooperate, but he said that he'd give Robert Mueller his password to his email so that he could look through them himself. I mean, clearly the man is unstable, but is there any responsibility with the networks, the cable TV? I mean, they should have put him on the air in the first place if they knew he was drunk and he smelled of alcohol.
Well, that was one, right? That was Aaron Burnett, who was actually face-to-face with him, and then says this on the air, "I smell alcohol in your breath," which is, I don't know, a little rude. I mean, they put him on the air. It was their decision to do that. The rest of those, I think, were all call-ins, so I'm not necessarily sure that anybody was aware that he might have been under the influence. Remember that Nunberg's kind of a loose cannon anyway. It's one of the reasons why he got fired from the Trump campaign in July of 2015 is because he had a tendency to shoot his mouth off. He had a tendency to write things that were, inappropriate and inflammatory. And so that's sort of a known quantity with Sam Nunberg. He's going to go on the air and he's going to say things that, most people probably wouldn't say because he doesn't really have a good check on his mouth. And so I'm not necessarily sure that any of those other outlets understood that there was anything going on there other than Sam Nunberg being Sam Nunberg. But, yeah, I mean, if Aaron Burnett smelled alcohol in his breath, they should have waved that one off rather than put it on the air at all.
Or she shouldn't have left the flask with Johnny Walker Black in the green room in the first place. So here's the thing, though. What does this say about Mueller's investigation? This is a guy they're subpoenaing because apparently they believe he has something pertinent to share. This is the kind of person you want to stake the credibility of your investigation and anything that comes from it on?
Well, you have to look at it in the context that there was a whole series of subpoenas that went out over the last couple of weeks. I think over the last month, actually, to various people that are somehow connected to this probe. And Nunberg just happens to be one of those people because he worked on the campaign. They're looking for communications that have to do with certain people. There's 10 names on the list. Donald Trump is one of them. Carter Page, Roger Stone. There's some other people that are on the list. But not, for instance, Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, Donald Trump Jr., or Jared Kushner, which is really interesting, especially because of the interest in the Trump Tower meeting. Apparently, those names aren't on the list of communication interest. So I'm not exactly sure what the point of these subpoenas are, but apparently they went out to a number of people. Nunberg just happened to be one of them. And so him flipping out over this subpoena is, I think, a really good demonstration of the fact that when you get a subpoena, you really need to call an attorney.
Right.
Like a public service announcement that the criminal defense attorneys can use.
Call an
don't let
attorney.
this happen to you. Yeah. Right.
But Sam Nunberg,
the first rule of Subpoena Club is you don't talk about Subpoena Club. And the second rule of Subpoena Club is you don't talk about Subpoena Club.
But he did allege in one of the interviews that I saw that President Trump knew about the meeting at the Trump Tower a week before it happened. Do you believe him?
It's hard to believe anything that he said after yesterday. He also said that he didn't think that Trump had anything to do with it, that it was a witch hunt. I mean, he was rambling. And, just contradicting himself. And there's at least a few people, myself included, are wondering maybe that was the point. Maybe he just wanted to impeach himself as a witness up front, which is, really dangerous to do when you're under subpoena. But, it's, again, if you don't call an attorney and think that you understand the law, maybe you do foolish things like this.
He's crazy like a fox. I don't know. I don't know if I'm persuaded by that. But here's another curious development, and that's this Australian Foreign Minister, Alexander Downer, who helped arrange a $25 million donation from the country of Australia to the Clinton Foundation in 2006, was the person who tipped off the FBI about the conversation he had with George Papadopoulos that initiated the FBI's Russia probe. So now we talked to Ambassador John Bolton earlier in the show, and he knows Downer and suggested that he's a friend of America and all that, and maybe he didn't appreciate the implications of what he was doing. But whether it was, whether there was no malintent or not, this, additional context of here's another guy who was kind of in bed with the Clintons in a material way, and he's the part of how this probe got launched in the first place, it just doesn't kind of set right, does it?
I guess there's coincidences in life. They pop up from time to time, and this might very well be one of them. I mean, John Bolton would know this person better than I would, and certainly Australians are very friendly to the United States, and that includes friendly to people in both parties. And it's not unusual to see people who were involved in government at the time that the Clinton Foundation was operating to have had some contact with it, because they were working with a lot of governments. They were dealing with a lot of different. That was sort of the point, was to bolster Hillary Clinton's foreign policy credentials by creating this multinational foundation that did work for and with a lot of governments. So that part isn't unusual, but it is an odd coincidence, and it does sort of make it, as John Solomon argues in The Hill, and he's the person who reported it this morning or last night, does sort of make it a little circular that the FBI's only source for this turns out to really just continuously be the opposition research of the Clintons in one sense. And so, I think it's interesting. I think it's worth reviewing. I'm not necessarily sure that it's determinative, but it's awfully odd.
So the March 5th deadline has come and gone for DACA, and is this stalemate going to last forever? And can you imagine, though, if you were here, if you were a dreamer, and you're just wondering what's going to happen next? So what do you think is going to happen, if anything?
Well, I don't think anything's going to happen anytime soon, because the deadline sort of is a moot point now, because two courts have issued stays which are requiring the Trump administration to continue DACA for those who are already enrolled. They don't have to accept new applicants, and they're not, but they have to continue the deferred action for those who have already enrolled in the program. They just got a favorable court ruling in a district court in Maryland last night, but that's not going to overcome the other district court rulings. You have to go to the appellate court before you can do something like that. I think that there's going to be at least several months and maybe more than a year before this works its way through the courts. So I think the stalemate will continue, and I think both sides will have room to try to maneuver. I don't see anything. I don't see a reason why this is going to become an issue, an acute issue anytime soon. It will probably go through the midterms and maybe into June of next year if the Supreme Court picks it up for its next term.
How acute will the issue of tariffs be within the party? Paul Ryan, critical of the president yesterday, is 25% tariff on steel and 10% tariff on foreign-made aluminum. And is this going to be something that blows over relatively quickly, or is this going to be something that has some staying power in terms of division within the party?
Oh, I think this one has staying power if they stay applied. There's some. I think that this was mostly a leverage point to try to get Canada and Mexico to agree to more significant concessions in the NAFTA renegotiations. I still think he'll apply them if they don't, but I think that that's what this is about. And I think what Trump wants is a renegotiated NAFTA that he can put his name on and say, this is a great deal for America, and I got it for you because I was willing to fight and I was willing to play hardball. And so it might take applying those sanctions and letting Canada and Mexico feel the bite of that for a while before before they make any concessions at all, assuming they do. So I think it's coming up, and I think it's still going to be a big issue within the party. And I think the big threat here is that it's going to undo all of the economic benefit that came out of the tax cuts, which puts Republicans back in the status quo ante before they pass that, which is not very good for their midterm prospects.
And why do you think the market is so freaked out about the trade war?
Well, trade wars are damaging. The question is whether or not there's going to be a trade war. And the markets rebounded yesterday because I think that they felt that the possibility of a really broad trade war was probably low after their initial apprehension about this. But again, I think it's also going to depend on whether these things actually get applied. The market's going to react badly if these things actually come into force, and if the EU and Canada and Mexico retaliate. I think it's going to be a whole series of things, and then we'll see how the market reacts to that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Walter Russell Mead, though, in his piece in the Wall Street Journal today, where he says, this protectionist trade policy is something that Trump actually believes, to the extent that he has deeply rooted beliefs. This America First approach, his belief that policymakers and elites have not had America's interests first and foremost for some time, both when it comes to sort of democracy building the world over with respect to the neocons, as well as for the free traders. I think he really does believe in neo-mercantilism. I really think he is more, you can call it principled realism if you want, but certainly is not as internationalist in his approach to foreign policy on the national security front as previous presidents and many conservatives. So I think this has the potential to be a lingering issue, much more so than just the imposition of the steel and aluminum tariffs, just this real division within the party or between the free traders in the party and a neo-mercantilist like Trump, going forward for the rest of his term.
Yeah, Dan, I think you're exactly right. And there's one constant in his campaign, and even before his campaign. He changed his positions on several things over the last 30 years. Abortion is one of those things. Guns is another one of those things. But the one thing that he's always been is a protectionist. And he started that campaign by saying that he was going to break the bad deals that previous American presidents had made, that free trade agreements were sucker bets for the American worker. That's what made him popular. And he has really never changed his position on that. And so I don't know why anybody would be surprised that he is going to start pursuing tariffs. This is the one thing that I think was absolutely predictable about Donald Trump. And whether Republicans like it or not, that's the guy they elected.
He is Ed Morrissey, senior editor for HotAir.com and columnist for The Week. Ed, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.